Sergeant Marcus Thompson had been standing guard at the palace gates for over 15 years. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as tourists began gathering for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. His red uniform was perfectly pressed, his black boots polished to a mirror shine, and his ceremonial rifle held at attention with practiced precision. At 42 years old, Marcus had seen it all during his service with the Royal Guard. Overeager tourists trying to get too close to the gates, protesters attempting to chain themselves to the fence, and the occasional drunk who thought challenging a Queen's Guard would make for good entertainment. His trained eyes constantly scanned the crowd, looking for anything out of the ordinary. The palace grounds were particularly busy that Tuesday morning in late September. School groups had arrived early for educational tours, families with young children pointed excitedly at the guards, and street vendors sold miniature flags and postcards nearby. The familiar sounds of London traffic mixed with the chatter of visitors from around the world. Marcus noticed the white van immediately. It wasn't unusual for delivery vehicles to approach the palace area, but something about this particular van caught his attention. The driver seemed nervous, constantly checking his mirrors and wiping sweat from his forehead, despite the cool autumn weather. The van itself looked ordinary enough, with faded paint and a few dents that suggested it was used for regular work purposes. What made Marcus take a closer look was the way the van had been circling the block for the past 20 minutes. Each time it passed, the driver slowed down near the main entrance, his eyes darting between the guards and the crowd of tourists. This type of behavior always raised red flags in Marcus's mind. His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling him something wasn't right. The van pulled up to the curb about 50 meters from where Marcus stood. Through his peripheral vision, he watched as the driver got out and walked around to the back of the vehicle. The man was in his 30s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He kept looking around nervously as if he was expecting someone or worried about being watched. Marcus maintained his rigid posture, but his grip on his rifle tightened slightly. Years of experience had taught him how to appear completely still and ceremonial, while remaining fully alert to potential threats. The tourists continued taking photos and chatting among themselves, completely unaware of the tension building in the guard's mind. The driver opened the back doors of the van, and that's when Marcus saw the child. A young girl, probably no more than 8 years old, with curly brown hair and wearing a bright yellow dress, suddenly appeared from behind a group of tourists. She was holding what looked like a small stuffed animal and seemed to be alone, which was unusual given the strict supervision most children had in this area. The girl walked directly toward the van with purpose, as if she knew exactly where she was going. This immediately struck Marcus as odd because most children her age would be hesitant to approach a stranger's vehicle, especially in such a crowded public area. The way she moved suggested she had been given specific instructions about where to go and what to do. Marcus watched as the driver noticed the approaching child and quickly moved to the back of the van. The man's body language changed completely. Where he had appeared nervous and uncertain before, he now seemed focused and determined. He gestured for the child to come closer, and Marcus could see him saying something to her, though the distance and crowd noise made it impossible to hear the conversation. The trained soldier in Marcus recognized predatory behavior when he saw it. The way the man positioned himself between the child and the view of most passers-by, the quick glances he made to ensure no one was watching too closely, and the urgent way he was trying to get the girl to move toward the van, all triggered alarm bells in the sergeant's head. Every fiber of Marcus's being wanted to break from his ceremonial position and intervene, but he also knew that royal guards couldn't simply abandon their posts without proper cause. He needed to be absolutely certain that what he was witnessing was actually dangerous before taking action that could potentially create an international incident or false alarm. The child was now just steps away from the van's open doors. Marcus could see the driver reaching out his hand toward her, and the girl seemed ready to take it. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. His years of military training, his experience as a father himself, and his sworn duty to protect innocent people all converged into one clear thought. This child was in immediate danger. Without breaking his ceremonial stance, Marcus activated the small communication device hidden in his collar. In a voice so quiet that nearby tourists couldn't hear, He alerted his fellow guards to a potential situation developing near the white van. The message was brief but clear. Possible child abduction in progress, requesting immediate backup. Suspect is adult male in dark clothing near white commercial vehicle. The response was immediate. Within seconds, Marcus heard the subtle confirmations from his fellow guards positioned around the palace perimeter. They had received his message and were now also watching the situation unfold. The backup he requested was already moving into position, though they would need to be careful not to alert the suspect or cause panic among the hundreds of innocent tourists in the area. The little girl stopped just inches from the van's open doors, her small hand reaching toward the stranger. Marcus felt his heart racing beneath his ceremonial uniform, but his face remained perfectly stoic. 20 feet away, tourists continued taking selfies, completely unaware of the drama unfolding before their eyes. Marcus could see the man's lips moving as he spoke to the child, his voice too low to carry over the ambient noise of traffic and conversation. The girl tilted her head, listening intently, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter against her chest. Something about the man's body language made Marcus's stomach clench with worry. The way he kept glancing around, the urgent gestures with his hands, the way he positioned himself to block the view from most angles. It all screamed danger. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard the quiet voice of his commanding officer. "Thompson, what's your assessment?" The question was coded in military speak, but Marcus understood perfectly. Command wanted to know if this was worth breaking protocol and potentially creating a scene in front of hundreds of witnesses and international media. "High confidence," Marcus whispered back, using their established code for a genuine threat. Child appears compliant but unaccompanied. Subject showing classic grooming behavior patterns. The girl took another step closer to the van. Marcus could now see inside the vehicle, and what he observed made his blood run cold. The back of the van had been modified with what appeared to be a makeshift living space. There were blankets, food containers, and several items that looked like children's belongings scattered on the floor. Most disturbing of all, Marcus spotted what looked like restraints hanging from hooks mounted to the van's interior walls. His military training kicked into high gear. This wasn't just a potential kidnapping. This looked like a sophisticated operation designed to transport children. The implications hit him like a physical blow. How many other children had been in this van? Were there others still missing because no one had been in the right place at the right time to intervene? The man was now reaching out his hand toward the little girl, speaking more urgently. Marcus could see the child beginning to lift her foot to step up into the van. In approximately 10 seconds, she would be inside the vehicle and potentially lost forever. The decision was no longer about protocol or proper procedure. It was about saving a life. Marcus broke from his ceremonial position. The movement was swift and decisive. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward from his post, his rifle moving from the ceremonial at attention position to a ready stance. His voice, trained to carry commands across military parade grounds, boomed across the courtyard with unmistakable authority. "Stop! Step away from the child." The effect was immediate and electric. Tourists froze mid-conversation, cameras stopped clicking, and a sudden hush fell over the area as hundreds of people turned to see what was happening. The man by the van spun around, his face going white when he saw the royal guard approaching with his weapon ready. The little girl jumped back from the van, startled by the sudden commotion. Her eyes went wide as she looked between the uniformed soldier marching toward her and the man who had been trying to convince her to get in his vehicle. For the first time, Marcus could see uncertainty and fear creeping into her expression, as if she was suddenly realizing that something wasn't right about the situation. "Emma," a woman's voice screamed from somewhere in the crowd. "Emma, where are you?" Marcus kept his rifle trained on the suspect while scanning for the source of the voice. A woman in her 30s pushed through the crowd of tourists, her face pale with panic. She was clearly the child's mother, and Marcus could see the exact moment when she spotted her daughter standing dangerously close to the stranger's van. The man by the van made a split-second decision. Instead of trying to grab the child or flee, he slammed the van's rear door shut and sprinted toward the driver's seat. Marcus had to make a choice: pursue the suspect and potentially let him escape, or ensure the child's safety first. His training told him that protecting the innocent always took priority over apprehending criminals. "Secure the child," he called out to his backup, who were now emerging from their positions around the palace perimeter. Two fellow guards immediately moved to place themselves between the little girl and the van, while others began directing the crowd of tourists to move back and give them room to work. The van's engine roared to life. Marcus realized that if the suspect escaped, they might never get another chance to discover what was inside that vehicle, or identify the man who had been trying to lure children. More importantly, there might be evidence inside that could help locate other missing children, or prevent future abductions. "This is Sergeant Thompson requesting immediate vehicle pursuit authorization," he spoke into his radio. "Suspect fleeing in white commercial van, license plate." Marcus squinted at the retreating vehicle, trying to make out the numbers, but the van was already turning the corner and disappearing into London traffic. The mother reached her daughter just as Marcus was holstering his rifle. The reunion was emotional and immediate. Tears, tight hugs, and the kind of relief that comes from narrowly avoiding an unthinkable tragedy. The little girl Emma was crying now, finally understanding that she had been in real danger. "Thank you," the mother sobbed, looking up at Marcus with tears streaming down her face. "I turned around for just a second to look at the map, and when I looked back, she was gone. That man, he told her he had found her lost puppy in his van." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The classic predator technique, using a story about a lost pet to lure children away from safety. It was a method that had been used successfully for decades because it appealed to children's natural compassion and curiosity about animals. The palace grounds were now swarming with additional security, personnel and police officers who had been called to the scene. The media, which was always present for the daily guard ceremonies, had captured everything on camera. Marcus knew that within hours, this incident would be international news. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins arrived at the palace grounds within 20 minutes of receiving the call. She had been working child protection cases for over a decade, and the description Marcus had given over the radio sent chills down her spine. A modified van with restraints and what appeared to be a mobile prison designed for transporting children was exactly the kind of evidence they'd been hoping to find in their ongoing investigation. For the past 18 months, children had been disappearing from various locations around London. The cases seemed unrelated at first. Different neighborhoods, different times of day, different types of families affected. But Collins had noticed patterns that others had missed. All the children were between ages 6 and 10. All had been approached by friendly strangers who claimed to need help finding lost pets or who offered treats and toys. Most disturbing of all, none of the children had ever been found. Marcus was still at his post, though he had been temporarily relieved of his ceremonial duties to provide his statement. Collins approached him with the respect that one professional gives another when they've just witnessed exemplary police work. "Sergeant Thompson," she said, extending her hand. "Detective Inspector Collins, Metropolitan Police. I need to get your account of what happened, but first I want you to know that your actions today likely saved that little girl's life." Marcus shook her hand firmly. "I just did what anyone would have done, ma'am, but I'm concerned there might be other children at risk. What I saw inside that van, it wasn't set up for a single incident." Collins nodded gravely. "We've had similar thoughts. Can you describe exactly what you observed inside the vehicle?" As Marcus recounted the details, the modified interior, the restraints, the children's belongings, the blankets and food supplies, Collins took careful notes. Each detail confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't an opportunistic criminal. This was someone who had been planning and executing child abductions for an extended period. "Did you get a clear look at the suspect?" Collins asked. "Yes, ma'am. White male, approximately 30 to 35 years old, medium build, dark hair under a baseball cap. He was wearing a dark blue or black jacket and jeans. There was something about his approach that seemed practiced, like he'd done this before." Emma and her mother, Linda Harrison, were sitting nearby with victim support officers. The little girl had stopped crying but remained close to her mother's side. Collins approached them gently, knowing that getting information from a traumatized child required patience and skill. "Emma," Collins said, kneeling down to the girl's eye level, "you're very brave and you're safe now. Can you tell me what the man said to you?" Emma looked at her mother for reassurance before speaking in a small voice. "He said he found my puppy. He said someone had told him I was looking for a lost puppy, and he had found it in his van." He seemed really nice. Collins felt her jaw tighten. "Did he describe what the puppy looked like?" "He said it was small and brown and white, just like the one I've been asking Mummy for." Emma's eyes filled with tears again. But we don't have a puppy. I just keep asking for one. The sophistication of the approach was chilling. The suspect had clearly been watching Emma and her mother long enough to know about the child's desire for a pet. This suggested surveillance, planning, and a level of preparation that made Collins's skin crawl. How long were you and Emma at the palace this morning before the incident? Collins asked Linda. About an hour, Linda replied, still shaken. We got here around 9:30 for the tour. Emma loves the horses and the guards. We were supposed to meet my sister's family here, but they were running late. An hour of observation would have been plenty of time for an experienced predator to identify a target and develop an approach strategy. Collins realized they were dealing with someone who was not only dangerous but also highly skilled at what he did. Meanwhile, other officers were canvassing the area, collecting security camera footage from nearby businesses and traffic cameras. The van's license plate had been partially obscured, but there was hope that the numerous cameras in the area might have captured a clearer image or tracked the vehicle's escape route. Sergeant Marcus Thompson's radio crackled to life. Thompson, this is command. We've got a situation. The van has been spotted abandoned in a car park 3 miles from your location. Bomb disposal is on scene as a precaution, but initial assessment suggests the vehicle was abandoned in haste. Collins looked at Marcus with a mixture of excitement and concern. This could be our break, but it also means he's still out there, possibly on foot, possibly with access to another vehicle. The abandoned van location was significant. It was near a major transportation hub where someone could easily catch a bus, train, or taxi to disappear into the city. It also suggested that the suspect had an escape plan in place, which further indicated this was not his first time dealing with law enforcement attention. Within 30 minutes, Collins received the call she had been both hoping for and dreading. The forensic team at the abandoned van had made disturbing discoveries. Inside the vehicle, they found children's clothing, toys, and personal items that belonged to at least 6 different children. More importantly, they found a notebook containing detailed observations about children's routines, including schools they attended, parks they frequented, and family schedules. The notebook contained Emma's name and detailed notes about her visits to the palace with her mother. It also contained information about 5 other children, including 2 who had been reported missing in recent months. The level of surveillance and planning documented in those pages painted a picture of a methodical predator who had been operating successfully for an extended period. Collins realized they were now dealing with not just an attempted kidnapping, but potentially a serial child abduction case with multiple victims. The evidence suggested that several missing children cases that had been treated as separate incidents were actually connected to the same perpetrator. Sergeant Thompson, Collins said, returning to where Marcus stood with his commanding officer. I need you to know that what you prevented today was likely much more significant than just one attempted abduction. Based on what we found in that van, we believe this suspect has been responsible for multiple disappearances. Marcus felt the weight of that information settle on his shoulders. If he had hesitated, if he had followed protocol and waited for backup, if he had second-guessed his instincts, Emma would have become another missing child statistic. But more than that, they never would have gotten this close to a suspect who had been successfully evading law enforcement for over a year. The investigation moved into high gear as soon as the forensic team began processing the abandoned van. Detective Inspector Collins coordinated with multiple departments, knowing that they had a narrow window of opportunity before the suspect either fled the city entirely or went underground until the attention died down. Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic psychologist specializing in child predators, arrived at the scene to examine the evidence and help develop a profile of their suspect. As she reviewed the notebook found in the van, her expression grew increasingly grim. This individual has been planning these abductions for at least 2 years, Dr. Foster told Collins and Marcus. The level of detail in these observations suggests someone with significant free time, possibly unemployed or working flexible hours. The methodical approach and escape planning indicate prior experience, either with law enforcement or military training. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the suspect might have military background similar to his own. The idea that someone trained to protect people could use those skills to harm children was particularly disturbing. The notebook revealed a terrifying pattern, The suspect had been targeting children from middle-class families, specifically those who appeared to have routine schedules and predictable movements. Emma's case fit perfectly. Regular visits to the palace with her mother, always around the same time, always following similar patterns. Look at this entry. Dr. Foster pointed to a page dated 3 weeks earlier. He's been watching Emma and her mother for at least a month. He knew about her desire for a puppy, knew about their Tuesday morning palace visits, even knew that Linda often got distracted reading tourist information while Emma watched the guards. The sophistication was chilling, but it also provided law enforcement with valuable intelligence. If the suspect had been this methodical with Emma, he likely followed similar patterns with other potential victims. Collins immediately dispatched teams to locations mentioned in the notebook, hoping to prevent other planned abductions. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of the van yielded crucial physical evidence. DNA samples were found that matched 2 children who had been reported missing in the past year. Hair fibers, fingerprints, and fabric samples all contributed to building a case that could lead to conviction once they identified and apprehended the suspect. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the security cameras at a nearby hotel had captured a clear image of the suspect's face as he fled from the van. The facial recognition software produced a match within hours. David Christopher Henley, aged 34, a former Army logistics specialist who had been dishonorably discharged 3 years earlier for disciplinary issues. Henley's military record revealed a pattern of increasingly concerning behavior. He had been reprimanded multiple times for inappropriate contact with children during community outreach events. His discharge had come after an incident involving unauthorized photography of children at a military family day event. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Collins coordinated with military authorities to obtain Henley's complete service record and personal information. What they discovered painted a picture of a man whose psychological problems had escalated significantly since leaving the military. He had no known employment, received a small disability pension, and had been living in various temporary accommodations around London. His last known address was a bedsit in South London, Collins told Marcus as they reviewed the file, but according to his landlord, he moved out 2 months ago with no forwarding address. He's been essentially homeless, which explains why he was using the van as a mobile operation. The search for Henley intensified. His photograph was distributed to every police officer in London, and alerts went out to transportation hubs, homeless shelters, and social services. The media was given his image and background information, turning the manhunt into a citywide effort. Emma and her mother were placed under protective surveillance as a precautionary measure. While it seemed unlikely that Henley would risk returning to target the same child who had led to his exposure, Dr. Foster warned that predators sometimes became obsessed with victims who escaped their grasp. "There's something else we need to consider," Dr. Foster told Collins during their evening briefing. The notebook mentions several other potential targets who are still vulnerable. Henley spent considerable time and effort developing these plans. He may try to salvage what he can before leaving the area. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Emma's trusting face as she approached the van, the practiced way Henley had positioned himself to avoid detection, and the chilling evidence they had found inside the vehicle. His decision to break protocol had been vindicated, but the knowledge of what could have happened haunted him. His phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Detective Inspector Collins. "We've got him," she said simply. A homeless shelter worker in East London recognized his photo from the news. He checked in 3 hours ago using a false name, but the worker was sure it was the same man. "Armed response teams are moving in now." Marcus asked if he could be present for the arrest, and Collins agreed. As someone whose quick thinking had prevented a tragedy and led to breaking open the case, he had earned the right to see it through to its conclusion. The arrest was swift and without incident. Henley was found sleeping in a dormitory-style room at the shelter, apparently exhausted from days of being on the run. When officers woke him, he initially tried to maintain his false identity, but when confronted with the evidence from the van and his own notebook, his resistance crumbled. "I never hurt them," were his first words after being read his rights. The statement sent chills through everyone present, as it seemed to confirm that there had indeed been multiple victims. During the initial questioning, Henley's behavior alternated between defiant justification and breaking down completely. He claimed he had been trying to rescue children from neglectful parents, though the evidence clearly contradicted this delusional narrative. As dawn broke over London, Marcus stood outside the police station where Henley was being processed. The investigation would continue for months as authorities worked to identify all of the victims and build cases for each incident. But the immediate threat was over, and Marcus knew that his moment of decisive action had not only saved Emma, but potentially prevented many other tragedies. The interrogation of David Henley took place over several days, with Detective Inspector Collins leading the questioning alongside specialists in child psychology and criminal behavior. Marcus was allowed to observe from behind one-way glass, wanting to understand the mindset of the man he had stopped from destroying lives. Henley's confession was both disturbing and revealing. Over the course of 18 months, he had successfully abducted 7 children. 3 had been recovered alive from various locations where he had held them temporarily, before moving them to what he called safer situations. The other 4 children remained missing, and Henley claimed he couldn't remember specific details about what had happened to them. "He's lying about the memory loss," Dr. Foster told Collins during a break in the questioning. "His recall is extremely detailed when it comes to planning and surveillance, but becomes conveniently fuzzy when we ask about the children's ultimate fate. This suggests he knows exactly what happened, but is trying to minimize his legal exposure." The recovered children were found in various states of physical and psychological trauma. They had been kept in different temporary locations around London: an abandoned warehouse, a rented storage unit, and a derelict building scheduled for demolition. All showed signs of prolonged captivity, but were physically unharmed in ways that could have been much worse. Marcus learned that the children had been kept drugged with mild sedatives to keep them compliant, fed regularly, and moved frequently to avoid detection. Henley had created a horrific but systematic operation designed to keep his victims alive while he decided what to do with them long term. The investigation revealed that Henley had been in contact with other individuals who shared his disturbed interests. His computer, seized from a storage locker he had rented under a false name, contained communications with a network of child predators operating across Europe. The international implications of the case meant that Interpol and multiple national police agencies became involved. This was bigger than just one man operating alone, Collins explained to Marcus. "We've uncovered evidence of a coordinated network that was trading information about potential targets, sharing techniques for avoiding detection, and in some cases, actually trafficking children across national borders." The scope of what Marcus had unknowingly disrupted was staggering. By preventing Emma's abduction, he hadn't just saved one child. He had exposed an entire criminal network that had been operating successfully for years. Emma's recovery was remarkable, largely because her ordeal had been so brief. The quick intervention meant she had experienced fear and confusion, but not the prolonged trauma that the other victims had endured. Her mother, Linda, became an advocate for child safety education, speaking at schools and community groups about the sophisticated tactics used by modern predators. "People think they know how to keep their children safe," Linda told a parent group at Emma's school. "We teach them not to talk to strangers, not to accept candy from people they don't know." But this man knew things about Emma that made him seem trustworthy. He knew about her desire for a puppy, knew our routine, knew how to approach her in a way that seemed helpful rather than threatening. Marcus found himself grappling with the psychological impact of what he had witnessed and prevented. The knowledge that his split-second decision had saved not just Emma, but potentially dozens of other children was overwhelming. He began suffering from nightmares and anxiety, leading his commanding officer to recommend counseling through the military's support services. The therapy helped Marcus understand that his response had been exactly what his training and instincts had prepared him for. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the military psychologist assigned to his case, helped him process the weight of responsibility he felt. "You've spent 15 years training to recognize threats and protect innocent people," Dr. Walsh told him. "When the moment came, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. The guilt you're feeling isn't about your actions, it's about the magnitude of what you prevented and the knowledge of what happens when no one is there to intervene." As the legal proceedings moved forward, Marcus was called to testify as the primary witness. His account of the events became crucial evidence in building the prosecution's case against Henley and the other network members who were gradually being identified and arrested across Europe. The courtroom testimony was difficult but necessary. Marcus had to relive those tense moments when he watched Emma approach the van, describe the split-second decision to break protocol, and explain how his military training had prepared him to recognize the threat. Sergeant Thompson, the prosecuting attorney, asked during his testimony, "What would have happened if you had followed standard protocol and waited for backup before intervening?" Marcus looked directly at the jury as he answered, "Emma Harrison would have disappeared into that van, and we would never have found evidence linking the defendant to the other missing children. The entire network would have remained operational, and more families would have suffered the loss of their children." The defense attorney tried to argue that Marcus had acted precipitously, that the situation might have been resolved without force if he had waited for backup. But the evidence from Henley's notebook and the forensic analysis of the van made it clear that this was a practiced predator who had successfully carried out similar abductions multiple times. Henley was ultimately convicted on multiple counts of child abduction, false imprisonment, and conspiracy charges related to the international trafficking network. He received a sentence of 35 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Several other members of the network received similar sentences as the investigation continued to expand. The case had far-reaching implications for child protection services, law enforcement protocols, and public awareness campaigns. Marcus found himself reluctantly thrust into the role of a public figure, invited to speak at conferences and training sessions for security personnel about threat recognition and the importance of trusting professional instincts. 2 years later, Marcus Thompson stood once again at his post outside the palace gates, but everything had changed. The ceremonial duties remained the same, but he now carried the weight of experience that few soldiers ever bear. His actions that September morning had become legendary within the Royal Guard, though Marcus himself remained uncomfortable with the attention. The investigation into Henley's network had led to the rescue of 16 children across 4 countries and the arrest of 23 individuals involved in the trafficking operation. The international cooperation required to dismantle the network had set new standards for cross-border law enforcement coordination in cases involving child exploitation. Emma Harrison, now 10 years old, had grown into a confident and articulate young girl who showed no lasting trauma from her brief encounter with danger. Her mother, Linda, had become a prominent child safety advocate, and together they had established a foundation that provided training to parents and children about modern predator tactics. "Uncle Marcus," Emma called out as she approached the palace gates with her mother and a group of school friends. She had taken to calling him that after their paths continued to cross at various community events and safety presentations. Marcus smiled, though he maintained his ceremonial posture. Emma and her classmates were on a school trip to learn about the Royal Guard and palace security. It had become an annual tradition at her school, partly as an educational experience, and partly as a reminder of how ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they chose to act. The story of that September morning had been featured in newspapers, television documentaries, and training manuals around the world. Marcus had received commendations from multiple law enforcement agencies, the royal family, and child protection organizations. But the recognition that meant the most to him was the simple fact that Emma was safe and thriving. Detective Inspector Collins had been promoted to chief inspector and now headed a specialized unit focused on child protection and trafficking cases. She maintained regular contact with Marcus, often consulting with him on threat assessment and the behavioral indicators that had allowed him to recognize the danger to Emma. "Your military training taught you to assess threats quickly and act decisively," Collins had told him during one of their conversations. "But what made the difference that day was your willingness to trust your instincts even when it meant breaking protocol. That's not something that can be taught in a classroom." The case had also led to significant changes in how the Royal Guard operated. While maintaining their ceremonial duties, guards now received enhanced training in threat recognition and child protection. They were equipped with better communication systems and given clearer authorization to break from ceremonial protocol when public safety was at immediate risk. Dr. Amanda Foster had used the case as the foundation for research into predator behavior and prevention strategies. Her work had influenced policies at schools, public venues, and tourist attractions around the world. The techniques Henley had used were now part of standard awareness training for parents and children. What we learned from this case, Dr. Foster wrote in her published research, is that modern child predators are far more sophisticated than previous generations. They use surveillance, psychological manipulation, and detailed planning that can defeat traditional safety education. The only effective counter is trained adults who understand these tactics and are prepared to intervene decisively. Marcus had struggled with the psychological aftermath of the case longer than anyone expected. The knowledge of what could have happened, combined with the details that emerged during the investigation about other children who hadn't been so fortunate, had taken a serious toll on his mental health. The military counseling services had been crucial in helping him process the trauma of not just what he had witnessed, but what he had learned about the scope of child exploitation that existed in the world. Dr. Walsh had helped him understand that his reaction was normal for someone who had been thrust into such circumstances. "You've seen evil in a way that most people never do," she had told him. "The nightmares, the anxiety, the sense of responsibility for children you've never met. These are all normal responses to abnormal circumstances. The key is channeling those feelings into positive action rather than letting them consume you." That positive action had taken the form of Marcus becoming an advocate for child protection. Training among security professionals, he spoke at conferences, consulted with police departments, and helped develop training materials that taught threat recognition skills to guards, teachers, and other professionals who worked in public spaces where children might be at risk. His presentation always included the same central message: trust your instincts, act decisively when children are at risk, and never assume that someone else will intervene if you don't. The ripple effects of that September morning continued to spread in ways Marcus had never anticipated. The case had become a teaching tool in police academies, military training programs, and child psychology courses. The detailed forensic analysis of Henley's methods had helped law enforcement agencies identify similar predators in other cases. 3 separate investigations in different countries had successfully used the behavioral patterns identified in Henley's case to apprehend suspects who were operating using nearly identical methods. The notebook found in his van had become a template for understanding how modern child predators operated, and the counter-strategies developed from studying his techniques had prevented dozens of other attempted abductions. Linda Harrison often brought Emma to Marcus's speaking engagements, where the young girl would address audiences about the importance of trusting adults when something felt wrong. Her poise and articulate manner of speaking about her experience had a powerful impact on listeners, particularly parents who realized how easily their own children could find themselves in similar danger. "The man seemed really nice," Emma would tell audiences. "He knew things about me that made him seem like someone who was trying to help. But something felt wrong, even though I couldn't explain what it was. When Sergeant Thompson shouted, I realized I should have listened to that feeling sooner." Her message was simple but profound. Children needed to be taught to trust their instincts about danger, even when adults seemed friendly and helpful. The traditional stranger danger warnings were inadequate against predators who use sophisticated psychological manipulation and surveillance to appear trustworthy. Marcus had also maintained contact with the families of the other children who had been rescued as a result of the investigation. Their stories were heartbreaking but ultimately hopeful. With proper counseling and support, most of the children had recovered from their ordeals and were living normal lives. Their families often credited Marcus's quick thinking with not only saving Emma but also leading to the rescue of their own children. The international cooperation sparked by the case had led to the establishment of new protocols for sharing information about child predators across national borders. The network that Henley had been part of had operated successfully for years, partly because different countries weren't effectively communicating about similar cases occurring in their jurisdictions. On quiet days at his post, Marcus sometimes reflected on the randomness of fate that had put him in exactly the right place at the right time to prevent a tragedy. If he had been assigned to a different post that day, if Emma had visited the palace an hour earlier or later, if Henley had chosen a different location for his attempt, any number of small changes could have resulted in a completely different outcome. But Dr. Walsh had helped him understand that it wasn't really about luck or coincidence. His 15 years of training, his developed ability to recognize threats, and his willingness to act when others might hesitate. These factors had created the conditions that made the intervention possible. "You were prepared when the moment came," she had told him. "That's not luck, that's professionalism." The case had also strengthened Marcus's faith in the importance of the work that he and his fellow guards did every day. While their primary role was ceremonial, they also served as trained security professionals, whose presence could deter criminal activity and whose training equipped them to respond to emergencies. As Emma and her classmates finished their tour and prepared to leave, she broke away from the group to approach Marcus's position. In a voice loud enough for her classmates to hear but respectful of his ceremonial duties, she said, "Thank you for keeping people safe, Uncle Marcus. I'm glad you were here when I needed you." Marcus maintained his stoic expression, but those who knew him well could see the emotion in his eyes. Later, when he was off duty, he would write in his journal about the continued responsibility he felt not just to Emma, but to all the children whose lives had been changed by the events of that September morning. The final chapter of the Henley case had been written in courtrooms and police stations around the world, but its real legacy lived on in the enhanced awareness, improved training, and strengthened international cooperation that had emerged from one soldier's decision to trust his instincts and act when a child was in danger. Marcus Thompson returned to his ceremonial duties, knowing that his vigilant